welcome back to another episode celebrating the 7th anniversary of the Business of Story podcast. I'm your host, Park Howell, and today you'll learn how to build an over-the-top engaged community through the stories you share and how you share them. But to make your stories as compelling as possible starts with learning the ABT Agile narrative framework. The term Agile in business typically means speed to market, but Agile communications is about using storytelling to accelerate your speed to meaning. You see, business is no longer about survival of the fittest, but survival of the fastest. And the ABT is the most agile way to make your stories land the first time. Here's what today's guest, Dana Malstaff, founder of Boss Mom and the creator of the Nurture to Convert Society, thinks of the ABT Agile Narrative Framework after she learned about it from my Business of Story workshop at this year's Social Media Marketing World.
Hey, Dana Malstaff here from Boss Mom, and I absolutely love using the ABT method. Park is brilliant. It simplifies a way for me to look at what I'm saying and actually say it in a way that entices my audience to take action and fall in love with everything I'm doing. The ABT is indispensable in my business. My clients love it. I was actually just on a call before this with, I'm doing a coaching certification right now for girls. And one of them said, she's like, oh, you're going to get on with Park? She's like, I loved that thing. She's like, the ABT, I've totally started using it. Everybody I tell about loves it, and you should love it too.
Now you can put the ABT Agile Narrative Framework to work for you by visiting businessofstory.com/ABT. Choose from either the ABTs of selling or the ABTs of branding quick online courses, or take them both. And see how this messaging marvel will make your stories more interesting, your offering more intriguing, and your audience more converted and engaged. That's at businessofstory.com/ABT. Now, as you heard, Dana has a pretty strong opinion about using the ABT for Agile communications, but that's not where she stopped sharing her views on the world. In fact, she has a pretty strong opinion on the importance of making your opinions known to build an engaged following.
What are your opinions about how the world is broken? What are your opinions about how life is broken? What are your opinions about the things that people tell you that you don't think is right? Like, one of my key opinions happened because I was at school one day with my child, and a woman, was there volunteering with me, and she said, I love my kids too much to work. And I was like, well, that's insanely insulting. Like, you make me sound like I don't love my kids because I love to work. And I had to go home and I had to sit with that. And what I didn't come up with was an opinion that real moms love to work, right? My opinion was that each of us have a value and we have a place in creating a true community. That we all have to fill different roles, and we have to accept other people's roles, and we have to accept our roles without judgment, but with love and understanding that it takes multiple different people to create a community. And it really formed my opinions around community. So we start with the opinions, because the opinions are where the magic happens. And to me, all the messaging unfolds from there.
In addition to building community around Boss Mom and the Nurture to Convert Society, Dana is a mother, author, podcaster, content strategist, template architect, blind spot reducer, engagement facilitator, and movement maker. She helps moms with beautifully unpredictable schedules grow successful and sustainable businesses that don't take up all their time and keep working even when they have to step away to be a mom or, any other important role. Today, you'll learn why your stories don't matter as much as their stories matter to build an engaged community. Why sharing your hot mess helps build belonging with your people. And the 6 ingredients to creating an alluring story based on Dana's permission sandwich template. I love that term. You'll eat it up, as I did. Anywho, all that and more for you with the ever effervescent Dana Malstaff on the Business of Story. Dana, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. I've been looking forward to this all week.
Well, I'm so happy to hear that. You and I got acquainted at Social Media Marketing World this past year, and I've got so thankful for them, the staff there, because they had you as my moderator, my host for my Business of Story session, and I can't imagine being introduced in a more enthusiastic way than what you did, and maybe even more important, when you got after some of those people that were talking and making a bunch of noise 2/3 of the way through. I loved that. Thank you for that.
That must have been the mom in me. I'm very decisive. Like, respect in my family was very important. My dad, when I was growing up, used to say, have some decorum. You're the ambassador of this family. Hilariously, we were at the pool yesterday. My son did something and I said, Jake, have some decorum. And my daughter, who's going to turn 7, turned around and said, yeah, you're the ambassador of this family. And I was like, I'm glad I'm making that a generational thing about respect.
Well, and he didn't say, what's decorum? That's what I would have said at that age.
Words are our we were literally talking about the difference between a carfuffle and shenanigans in the car the other day. So they understand the distinction between words, because my family is very big on the vibrancy of the English language. And I don't like that we truncate words now. It's like an abomination to me. It's like, why would you make words shorter when there's so much that can be said with the right word?
You're so right. I love the word obfuscation. And I used that the other day. My wife, Michelle, says, I hate that word. And I said, precisely. It's this word that is just, it's almost like an onomatopoeia of what you do with people's brains when you use the word obfuscation. And by the way, when you're not very clear in your messaging or storytelling, you obfuscate and it pisses people off.
Oh, I like the word absquatulate.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Go ahead. What is it?
It means to leave suddenly without warning. So you get somebody at a party and then they just all of a sudden disappear. They absquatulate. So absquatulate just means to leave suddenly without warning. And I've always loved that word. And I had a friend who would do that. And now my daughter is that way. She'll just look at you and then she'll be like, I'm done. And she just disappears somewhere. So she absquatulates.
God, you would score like 120 points in Scrabble with absquatulate.
Well, I will tell you, my kids are almost 7 and almost 9, and Scrabble is their favorite game.
Well, no wonder. Where does that come from? I mean, were your parents just constantly having you in front of dictionaries and using big words?
We had a podium with the dictionary, and my dad would say, be one with your dictionary. And he was always writing. He has started businesses and entrepreneurship, but through part of my life with him, he's my stepdad since I was 8, was always writing a book or he's put out 3 or 4. And so, yeah, we would talk a lot about plots. We would talk about like being attentive to your surroundings and detail oriented. But yeah, we were the ones where we'd play Boulder Dash, where they'd give you a really ridiculous word and you have to get somebody to be convinced of the definition. And we would never have fun because he knew the actual definition. It was very annoying, of like the most random words. So yeah, words have been very big for us. And then my daughter, I love Scrabble because my daughter can't really spell. She doesn't know a ton of, all the words. But she's very confident about just putting a word down. And oh my gosh, I kid you not, half the time we look it up in the dictionary to go, well, let's see if that's a real word. And half the time it's a real word. And it's some weird, like what she put a word down and we were like, there's no way that's a word. And we looked it up and it was like the nipples of mammal animals. And you're like, how is that a thing? And we're like, well, I'll give it to you. It's a real word. Who knew?
What is the word?
Now I can't remember, right? It was a name of a character in a cartoon we watched. And we're like, you can't put names in there. And I was like, but we'll look it up just in case it's something else, because that's how we learn. And it turned out it was a word. It was like, yeah, I will message you. I will remember what it is and message you.
We'll put it in the show notes for sure. So then when you grow up with all of these big, $10 words, when you are writing and telling your stories and communicating, how do you not accidentally default into using these big words other people don't know? I mean, you must have to actually kind of fight and say, no, I need the $1 words here. Yeah,
well, that's because generally writing is a first date, Like you don't get the big words until we've known each other for a while.
Okay.
Those are the deeper stuff. So I like to think of most of the content and the stories that we tell is the entry point. You wouldn't sit around. My dad and I started a podcast years ago and then stopped when my grandpa passed away, but it was called Make Me Care. And it was about storytelling. And the picture in the podcast was a campfire, which is, if it's not a word you'd use around a campfire, don't use it. Like that's the kind of thought we would have. Like you wouldn't use, absquatulate in a campfire. You'd use like, he hightailed it out of there. And that's way more of what you would say in storytelling.
I totally get that. Now, we're going to get to your work with Boss Mom and your work with the Nurture to Convert Society. I want to learn more about that. I'm really curious about the permission sandwich method. But first, share that story about your dad putting you to work at his shop and what that meant to you, and maybe even how it's informed who you are today.
Yeah. It's funny too. We were coming on and I know he would ask these questions beforehand. And I was like, I really hope I remember what I told you, but I do remember that story. So my real dad owned an auto body shop since before I was born.
And where was this, by the way?
Southern California. So in the desert, we call it the high desert here. And it's the middle of nowhere. It's on the way to Vegas, right? I would say most people, I don't stop there if you don't have to, is the way I would describe it.
Unless your car's broken down and showed up at your dad's workshop.
Yeah, like legit tumbleweed. So yeah, people would come through town. I mean, it was a small city, but come through town. Yeah, and my dad would always, he's the guy who bartering, like that's where I learned the benefit of bartering and of internship and of mentorship and apprenticeship and all of these things, because right now we're in this era of course creation and learning and group stuff, but I'm still all about like you learn from the people you want to learn from, like watch somebody doing it, listen to somebody doing it and learn from them, glean all that stuff. So he would take, people would come in with broken cars on the weekend and he couldn't help himself. He'd want to go fix it. Well, I'd spend maybe 2 weeks out of the year and I would hang out with him. I didn't actually see him when we moved away. I didn't see him that often. But he was an airbrusher. He was a beautiful artist, actually, even though he just was known for his auto body work. He had these amazing, airbrushing that he would do. And he airbrushed me a desk one summer and it was purple, which is fun because purple's always been my color way before I had Boss Mom. And he airbrushed my name on it. I have a picture of it somewhere. And he told me, he was like, this is your desk and you get to run the office and you get to take the calls and you get to get the lunch and you get to, and it was this real defining moment where I don't think parents recognize the value of giving a child responsibility, right? This idea that we need to take everything off our kids' plates and make everything easy and never put any hardships on them. He literally just handed me the keys and said, run this office, right? And come to me if you need something. And it was insanely inspiring and empowering. I would take clipboards and I would follow him around when he was doing estimates and I would call people to let them know their cars were done. And of course, I then discovered I love efficiency. So I cleaned the office. I changed his filing system. I did. So within several weeks, I realized I really like things that run better. Like I like efficiencies. Like why do it this when you could do this? Like let's see whose car is going to take let's actually work on things based on things. So I made his business run better as like a 10-year-old. And that's when I really discovered what I enjoy is efficiencies. I enjoy systems. And what I found over the years is I really enjoy reverse engineering things that work and then templatizing them like your ABT, right? Down to things that can be replicated, so like I did 6 Sigma black belt, did the first section of that because I love that stuff so much. And it all stemmed from my dad airbrushing my name on a desk one year.
What did you study in college?
Broadcast journalism. I originally wanted to be a news anchor. And then I studied abroad my junior year in college and realized I didn't like American news. And came back. Yeah, it was more like a caricature. Like I decided the idea of regurgitating other people's stories wasn't as fun as the idea, and being told what stories I got to tell, right, would be as fun as me telling my own. So I came back here. I did my reels to put out to Lubbock, Texas, and all those places, so I could potentially, shoot the squirrel sighting or whatever terrible news I'd be doing. And then ended up getting into my first actual job where I watched old movies when they were putting all the old movies on DVDs. I watched all the old movies like Red Skelton, the I Love Lucy, the, like all the old stuff, like Hitchcock stuff, and I put them on DVDs. I pulled the screenshots so you could pick the screen, like the scene. I did the blurbs on the back and did like the basic artwork on it, and that was my first job out of college. And I ended up project managing all of their stuff, and that's when I really realized, again, like coming back to what my dad had made me realize, which is I like running business. I like the running of a business. Like that's what really lights me up. And yeah, so journalism, I still use all of it because I'm on video and audio and all that stuff, but I'm probably one of the only people who has a degree that was useful.
And I imagine as you were dumping those old films over to DVD, you had to sit there and watch them real time because it wasn't like drag and drop.
It was the best job ever. It was the best job ever. If it would have made me any actual money, that would have been I literally sat in a dark room and watched old movies and old hilarious shows because all the old stuff's really good. Yeah, like watch the Carol Burnett show. She's freaking hilarious. And even today, like if you watch it. Yeah, so all that stuff. And then I got to pull this, and that was my job. It just didn't pay me. If I actually wanted to make money, you realize you have to up your skills and do things where your time is more valuable. And you are irreplaceable. And so that's where coming up with the things and the ideas and the concepts that are irreplaceable become the valuable part of starting your own business or starting your own consulting or whatever you do.
Of all those old movies you watched, which one was your favorite because it surprised you? Maybe you plugged it in and go, oh, I got to sit through this thing. And then you fell in love with it.
Oh, my favorite one is Little Shop of Horrors. The old one, like the old Little Shop of Horrors.
I didn't know there was an old one. I mean, did one come before the main one?
There's the Rick Moranis one, but then there's a really, really old one, like a black and white one.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yes,
I'll have to look that up.
I have it. I will have to. Yeah, it's so good. So I loved that. I loved. Gosh, we did a Tough Guys series, and I can't remember the name of it, but we watched these movies with like Reagan in them. Like there's just some really interesting old school stuff. Mm-hmm. But Carol Burnett and the Red Skelton were always my favorite. Oh, God, like I didn't even know who they were until I saw that. Like I had never been introduced to them. It's just that like stand-up show, like we're used to Colbert show, like those kinds of things. Yeah. But back then it was just so different.
The sketch comedy. Do you remember Tim Conway in the whole dentist bit where he's working on Harvey Korman?
And he accidentally stabs himself. Oh my gosh, yes.
Yeah, he accidentally puts the Novocaine in his body. Yeah. And then oh man, that is one of the absolute best bits ever.
Oh my gosh, no one is. It's so good. And it just, his facial expressions, like we don't appreciate that. And it just is different. Like Saturday Night Live is just different than it used to be. And if you watch some of the stuff, like some of that would never fly nowadays. You would never be able to do some of the comedy. They have a whole Carol Burnett one where they're doing a play and it needs to be this old flame that somebody's having an affair with, her husband's having an affair with, but they can't get the regular girl. So they get the original girl and it's 20 years later. So she's huge. She's like, used to be this tiny little ballerina, but now and the sketch of the hilarity of like, having to now do the play with this completely different sized person. And it's so funny and it's so playful and it's done in such good humor, but you wouldn't be able to do that now. Like it's just not something societally or socially that would be okay. So it is also really interesting to look at culturally storytelling, how we've changed and how we tell stories. And actually stories have gotten and movies have gotten so much more real and serious. When we do social media training, we talk about it as playful and serious truisms, that is what is trending right now in the storytelling space, is the serious truisms, is the calling out the wrong, calling out the thing, calling out the gap we want to fill in the way people are thinking, and then moving them into a new way of thinking is very popular right now. And it's gone very much from, think of Batman where everything was neon and colorful and playful, to serious Batman, like uber serious, dark, painful past and needs a psychiatrist Batman. Like that's where we are. And storytelling is so different when you look at that, which is fun to see the past and now look at where we are now.
Well, it seems like everyone is so easily offended this day and age that they can't see nuance behind a lot of the storytelling and whatever. And you're right, with the cancel culture and everything else. Now, granted, some of the stand-up comics are way over the top for my taste. But what is comedy and joke? It's always pulling out a truism, and sometimes as that audience member, you don't really appreciate that truism, but it's true and it can be funny. You just don't necessarily need to be offended by it.
Well, also marketing and branding by definition is exclusive. Like you cannot be inclusive, right? So a comedy, drama, anything where people will go, well, Dana, have you seen Ozark or something? I'm like, it's not really my thing. I watch John Wick, and then people will be like, that's way too violent. And I'm like, that's why I like it, because he's shooting things and it's awesome. And I don't want to watch something that feels like real life. So everybody having these differences, it's you're not doing something that that is branded enough, that is down a line of enough. If it appeals to everybody, like marketing innately cannot appeal to everybody. I do think there's a really good book called The Art of Possibility. It's written by a husband and a wife. It's best listened to because the husband is a conductor and the wife is a psychiatrist, and they flip chapters, and he's got this beautiful English accent, but he plays some of the music he talks about. It's so good that it'll literally change the way you experience conversations with people and take things in. But they do this great job of telling this story where he said they're in a boardroom and they're having a conversation, and an employee walks in and yells at the guy, and he stops for a moment and he goes, remember rule number 6. And he said, and the employee goes, oh, you're absolutely right, I'm sorry, and walks out. And the other guy that's sitting in the meeting with him turns around and goes, what is rule number 6? How did you just do that? They just apologized and left after yelling you about something. And he said, stop taking yourself so darn seriously. And he goes, oh my gosh, well, what are the first 5 rules? And he goes, there's no other rules. There's only rule number 6. So the playfulness, just go right to 6. Yeah, the playfulness of 1, not making it rule number 1, but making it rule number 6 in itself calls out the hilarity of not taking yourself so seriously. That's why everybody's offended, is because they're taking things so seriously, because playfulness implies courage. Like you cannot be playful without the confidence enough that life is happening, and it's not always happening to you, it's just happening around you. So I think playfulness plays into it, courage plays into it. And I also think that people believe innately, like they are so egotistical, unconscious, that like consciousness when a child becomes mature implies the understanding of life outside self, understanding the implication of what happens when you do something, like a consequence to your actions. Like children don't understand that. Their brain hasn't grasped that yet. You grow up and mature to believe that. When you don't have that consciousness of understanding how you affect other people, then everything that happens feels like it's done to you. So it's like you can't see past the Friday night lights is a phrase, because nothing is more important than the football game on Friday. And then you grow up and realize nothing is important about the football game on Friday. Everything else is more important. And so that consciousness, I think that's the problem, is people have stopped self-development because we've been told so much that who you are right now is perfect and everybody should love you who you are. And there has to be some balance of you are enough right now and continual improvement is required. Like those two things. And if we did those two things better, then I think we'd get that. I don't think people naturally want to be offended. I think it's uncomfortable. It's lonely. I think people do it and they wish they didn't, but we have to tell better stories to teach them how to move out of it. That's you got me ranty.
No, that was a good rant. It was a good rant. I didn't even want you to get me started on participation trophies, because I think that comes a lot with it too. So let's not go there. But we're going to be talking about, we are talking about engaged communities, and you do an exceptionally good job of building engaged communities. And so first off, let's tee this up. How do you, Dana, use stories and storytelling to create that engagement, to overcome the offense that some people may take, and really build that engagement that people show up because the others in that group actually care, they empathize, they understand, they appreciate who they are? but story plays such an important part of it. How do you do it?
Yeah. Okay. There's a couple important parts, especially based off of like the conversation we've been having. And one of them is your stories don't matter as much as their stories do, right? Which is actually really hard for people who consider themselves to be experts and coaches and mentors and those kinds of things, because they go, but I want to tell you my story. Like, my story is important. But if you want to build community, before you're allowed to tell your story, you have to ask somebody about their story. And that's the number one rule. There's two big parts of community, but that's the number one, because too many people wake up in the world feeling unloved, unvalued, unvaluable, right? Most of us, you've got kids and you're dealing with logistics and, getting people places, and you've been married long enough maybe, or trying to date, and you don't know where you stand, or you both are love each other, but don't say it as much. Like, there's all these things, that we don't feel valuable in. If you have your own business, you're constantly dealing with things that don't work all the time, and social media and marketing and all that stuff. Yeah. So it's like you have to step back for a moment and say, my story is valuable. But before I tell you my story, I want some context and I want to understand your story. So you do that by asking questions. So before you get on and you do a bunch of lives and you do a bunch of videos telling everybody your stuff, stop for a moment and ask everybody else, tell me about you. And then so what you do is you go into your industry. Like for us, we ask you about being a mom. We ask you about the things that they deal with. We ask you questions about, what is it that they like and they don't like. So you get to know. It's called market research, by the way, which is a great way to build community. You ask people questions about who they are and what they want. And when you start to recognize that your stories are more powerful when they're integrated in with other people's stories, because nobody loves community more than me going, well, I'm going to tell you this thing about my dad. Becky, you had a dad that did something similar, right? Like, tell me about that. And you start calling people out because I asked them their story first. So first is asking them story. And then the second one is communities based around belonging, right? Like if you hate running, like I do, I'm not going to hang out with a group of runners because everything they do sounds insane to me. They're like, I have a friend who's a runner. She's like, I love getting up at 5 a.m. and just going for a run. And I was like, I feel like hell would be somebody making me get up at 5 a.m. and go for a run. That sounds horrible. That sounds like literally the worst thing you could possibly ask me to do. But she finds it invigorating. She needs a community of people that makes what she does a good thing, a natural thing, a thing that makes sense. I need to hang out with people that every time they get the urge to exercise, they lay down until it passes. Those are my people, right? And so the sense of belonging is so important, right? So what you do is you have to do the beginning of that permission sandwich that you talked about. You have to not give them permission to do things, right? You can't say, I give you permission to be better, to have a better life, to do that. What you do is you give them permission to not change the things they can't change, right? I'm giving you permission as a mom to be a hot mess sometimes, right? There's a ton of successful moms, including myself, that I'm a hot mess at least once a week. I go through all the range of emotions just like my kids do. Being older doesn't mean you stop feeling, right? That's okay. If you're a hot mess sometimes, come join us. You're not crazy. You're totally the same. Just as Seth Godin said, people like us do things like this. Like that is the way it is. So those two things. And then when you tell your stories, you are giving permission, right? So when I talk about my stories, I look put together. I always want to look like somebody that would be somebody's mentor that you would look up to, right? But then I validate what they're feeling in my stories by telling them, oh yeah, like I look put together here. There's a pile. It's not even a pile of dirty clothes. It's a pile of clean clothes. And we've just started picking from the clean clothes that's now become next to it, the pile of dirty clothes. So we really don't use closets. We just have a pile where the clean and the dirty clothes go. And we just, pick from them. Sometimes I pick from the dirty clothes because there's not enough clean clothes, but it doesn't mean I can't run a great business. And then everybody else who feels that. So you got to create belonging, got to ask their questions to get their stories first. And then you get to tell your story. And then when you tell their story, people actually listen. Otherwise, everybody's telling their story and nobody cares about your story because they don't care about you. They got to care about you first.
Dana, is this a learned skill for you? And I ask that in all sincerity, because I don't know you that well, but I know you well enough that I feel like you are very much of an outgoing extrovert and you are able to build these engaged communities. And I would imagine growing up, you were probably, the king of the class, the queen of the classroom. Did you ever have a hard time like getting yourself to stop and listen, or what are the tricks to get people to say, hold your story for a moment and go ahead and listen and appreciate the stories that are coming in from your audience?
Okay, so first off, not the queen of the class at all. We moved around every 2 years. So I do believe that was a helpful skill to why I am outgoing and confident, is because I just had to be the new person all the time. We were not military. I get that question all the time. My mom was a travel nurse and my dad was writing at the time. So I joke that either they were gypsies or they were running from the law, and they never told me which, you know? So, but we just move and we played with that. So my parents and I became like a pod, which was good. So I have a very respectful relationship and a playful, fun relationship with my parents. My parents are very curious people, so we always wanted to learn things, which is awesome, which is great because when I was in high school and the internet was invented for the regular, normal human being, that made figuring out answers way easier. So the moving helped, and I am a natural talker, right? So there's two kinds of people. Usually extroverts are a speak to think person, and an introvert is a think to speak person, right? So a speak to think person clarifies their ideas by speaking them. We do better in masterminds and groups and meeting out with friends. An introvert is better with writing down and thinking it out. So like in an argument, an extrovert always has to concede to an introvert because they need to give them space to think. Otherwise, in a marriage relationship or a employee relationship or anything, like you have to know who works best. So speaking has always been a way I clarify my ideas. 100% have a huge, massive problem when I was growing up about not being the one who wants to always talk. I did hang out with a lot of introverts where they liked that I talked because I was a conversation initiator. And introverts love extroverts in that way because they don't have to think of what to say, but they can piggyback off of it. They want to be in a conversation, but they don't know how to initiate conversations all the time. So I ended up doing question-based selling training, Toastmasters, improv, like all of that stuff, and appreciative inquiry certifications, where you actually had to practice, not like when you're having a conversation, right? And you say something. My initial thought as a human being is to then tell you my same experience with that. So we had to practice not being allowed to talk about how you are the same or your experience, but you had to only ask a clarifying question. So we had to do these big practices of someone would say something and my urge would be, oh, my experience with that, but I couldn't. I'd say, tell me more about that. You mentioned this, tell me more. And in journalism school, you had to do the same thing. Like my story didn't matter. I was interviewing you for your story. So both of those things I do think helped with that skill for me to stop and go, okay, but then I also have my own podcast where my solo shows or in social media, in some of those places, I get to ramble and I don't have anybody else there. So I get to talk as much as I want. So I do have to create outlets where I get to just do whatever I want and be the center. And then remind myself constantly, okay, I need to be like, I have something I want to say, but I'm not going to say it. I'm going to ask a question instead. And honestly, I do believe questions are the answer. Everything can be solved with a better question, with a good question. So whenever you feel that urge to say something, say, how could I ask a question to get more information? And it will stop you from talking.
So what is Boss Mom and how did that come about?
Funny story. I quit my job back in 2012. So I was the director at a patient advocacy company. So I went into different companies to help with like employee retention. So we ran wellness programs and engagement programs and all that kind of stuff. And I was leaving. They were having a husband and wife own the company and they were getting a divorce. So there's a lot of volatility. So I was like, okay, well, I'll go and I'm going to start my own consulting company. It'd been kind of a bug had been put in my ear by a mentor. And on the night, my New Year's Eve was my last night. Everybody took me out and got like tons of shots of tequila and I got pregnant. So my ex-husband would be like, it's way too much information. And I was like, I think people can handle it. We're all adults.
No one's offended.
No one's offended. So I joke that I became a boss and a mom literally on the same night. But basically I lived in Columbus, Ohio. And for the next, 6 or so months after I had my son, I wanted him to take naps so I could work. Like I would love this, working on my business and figuring out what it was and building a website and like doing workshops and everything and really figuring it out. And I felt guilty that I wanted him to sleep, that I loved being a mom, but I didn't want to be a mom 24 hours a day. And I didn't want my world to be centered around my son. I didn't find joy in that. And so 6 months later, when we decided to move back to San Diego, where my parents are originally from, we came here, all of a sudden there was a ton more networking. There's a lot more entrepreneurship here in San Diego than there was in Columbus, Ohio. And I found some camaraderie, and I ended up in a mastermind that just some people put together. And one of them was a book coach. And he said, hey, I'll give everybody a great deal if anybody wants to write a book. And I was like, well, everybody in my family is creative and they're artists and writers. Like, I feel like I should write a book. So I was going to write a book about marketing. It was going to be called Expand Your Reach, which is what my company was called at the time, or my tiny freelancing business, if you want to call it that. And when we did all the mind mapping, what came out was Boss Mom. What came out was I really wanted to talk about all the moms out there that are not built to be stay-at-home moms. They want to be with their child. They don't want to go back and have a career, but they want some middle ground of identity and building something and being a mom at the same time. And how do you do that? And I ended up writing the book Boss Mom. And from there, we had such good feedback about women being like, there is no place like this that is giving me this permission to be this kind of person, that we started the Facebook group, we started the podcast. I started going out and pitching myself to get interviewed once a week, every week for like 2 years. It was relentless about it. And we never stopped. Now we boss mom the heck out of everything.
So you are a coach and mentor then to these women that want to be a boss mom. They love their kids, but they also want to have their hand in business as well.
Yeah, I'd like to say a facilitator, right? Like there's so much brilliance in people, right? And so much of life keeps that brilliance from coming out or making us feel like we can't or we shouldn't. And so I like to think that I just give them the right tools to unlock that brilliance, because the world's a better place for it. More ideas is better.
And then how did that lead into, or did it lead into, your Nurture to Convert society?
Yeah. So, branding, right? Vagueness is unhelpful. And Boss Mom, for all intents and purposes, is still a pretty vague brand, right? So we tried the Boss Mom, but we had the Boss Mom Academy, which is a great group coaching program that we had for several years up until the pandemic. We had the Boss Mom Vault. We had all of these things, but it wasn't speaking to the audience about the problem I really wanted to solve. So it is a good example of how I can have an overarching brand that is Boss Mom, but that doesn't mean all my products should be Boss Mom, right? So we brainstormed, and really one of the things that you want is you really want to own a word, right? Like I wanted to own the word nurture. Like that's what we're about. Like it's in the book name, it's in what we want to do, where we have a virtual retreat that's coming out because we don't do real events anymore, called the Boss Mom Virtual Retreat in September. And it's going to be Nurture Your Life. And we have different segments in nurture. We want to own the word nurture. So there's a nurture sequence, like it's all about nurturing. And so we knew that. And then we said, well, what did we want it to be? Well, we want it to convert. We want to convert to followers. We want to convert to, so it's like, what do we want it to do? Like, what is the result we want? And then we went out and asked everybody what we want it to be community based. So do you want it to be a club? Do you want it to be a society? Do you want it to be what it is? And everybody came back and voted, and society was prestigious enough, but welcoming enough. They had very specific reasons. So we went out and kind of think tanked it and came up with the Nurture to Convert Society. And it went from the Boss Mom Vault to the Nurture to Convert Society. And the sales like tripled once we flipped it. So it goes to show you, usually the content on the back end isn't the problem. It's the messaging on the front end. It's the problem.
Yeah, and like you said, with branding, you can't be vague. You've got to stand for something. And in your case, and we do this thing called the Dobzhansky statement when we're doing ABTs and getting people to get really focused. It's like, what's the one word theme to your message today? And it could be, by the way, an hour-long sales presentation you're giving. It could be a social media marketing world 90-minute workshop, or it could be establishing a brand. And in your case, there's nothing in Dana's story that makes sense except in the light of nurture. Mm-hmm. And it sounds like really everything you do is about nurturing the women that you help, your own businesses, your family, and so forth. Is that fair enough?
Yeah, not only that, but we make decisions on whether or not it is aligned with that, right? Because we have to make, there's so many things we could do. There's so many offers we could have, programs we could have, people we could help, all that kind of stuff. To narrow it down to something so completely simple, to say, whenever we do something, we go, does it nurture? How does it nurture? And does that nurturing align with who we're helping and how we want to help them? And it really helps us decide how we structure things, because there's so many different formulas and things you can, that people are going to tell you. You have to figure out which one works for you, like it feels aligned and works. Yeah, so that nurture word is how we base all of our decisions off of. But it's been really helpful to keep me from doing a lot of things that probably wouldn't been helpful for my business, by giving me permission to say no to something because it didn't align. I think we all have to have some kind of tethering or foundation that gives us permission to say no. Otherwise, there's too many, I'm doing air quotes, quote unquote, opportunities that we could seize that veer us off in the wrong direction, that can cost us a lot of money, time, heartache, all that kind of stuff. So yeah, nurture is my tethering.
When you are working with the members of your community and some of the women you're working with, do you try to get them, if they are kind of floundering around trying to figure out what is my one thing, do you take them through any sort of program that helps them find their nurture word?
Yeah. So I will say your nurture word, this is what I tell people, is like, we've got to start simple, and simple is more words than less. Right. So the worst thing you could do, in my opinion, in marketing is have the first part of your brainstorming be to figure out your one word. Like, that's unhelpful. Like, there are companies that have been in business for a long time and still don't know. It could take you years. So don't make that the goal. Brainstorming is messy. So what we do is we do a lot of mind mapping. So we bring them through mind mapping that's really messy. And what we center around is we center around what we call your key opinions, right? So in online space, a lot of our women, they know who they want to help, right? They know what problem they want to solve. Sometimes it's not both, right? But they're not sure how to structure their offers. They're not sure how to really structure their business, because they're not busy, savvy business owners. They're relationship coaches. They're like, I know how to fix your marriage, I just don't know how to market my business, right? And so we have them map out their key opinions. And what key opinions are your belief system about so we call them industry opinions, life opinions, and strategic opinions, or tactical opinions, right? And the industry opinions is how does the industry work that you don't agree with? So like, I don't agree that moms should be doing live launches, because the timing of that doesn't work. It's actually detrimental, right? So that's my key opinion. I have a girl who is helps with this particular kind of guided journaling, and she has a key opinion that gratitude journals are actually hurtful to moms, like new moms, because you feel guilty when you're not thankful for that child who just kept you up all night, right? So we've got ones where a woman who helps you have a better relationship with your daughter. She's a child psychologist. And the industry opinion that not all teenage girls are a handful, right? We have life coaches that are like, you're not too much is not a phrase that's relevant to your worthiness. Like, so what we do is, instead of saying, tell me what your business is about, tell me, what your values are, tell me what your mission statement is. And they don't know those things yet. We go, what are your opinions about how the world is broken? What are your opinions about how life is broken? What are your opinions about the things that people tell you that you don't think is right? Like, one of my key opinions happened because I was at school one day with my child, and a woman, was there volunteering with me, and she said, I love my kids too much to work. And I was like, well, that's insanely insulting. Like, you make me sound like I don't love my kids because I love to work. And I had to go home and I had to sit with that. And what I didn't come up with was an opinion that real moms love to work, right? My opinion was that each of us have a value and we have a place in creating a true community, that we all have to fill different roles, and we have to accept other people's roles, and we have to accept our roles without judgment, but with love and understanding that it takes multiple different people to create a community. And it really formed my opinions around community. So we start with the opinions, because the opinions are where the magic happens. And to me, all the messaging unfolds from there.
Well, the opinions then, I guess, help clarify what you actually stand for. that you believe in, your key opinions. And then when you go out as a brand, this is what I stand for. And that's important to find that clarity. So did you give yourself a permission sandwich when you got home and said, wait a minute, I don't got to beat myself up on this because my opinion, I don't share that same opinion with that lady. Is that the gist of a permission sandwich?
The permission sandwich is actually a set of I think it's 6.
Let's go.
Emails,
Let's go through the permission sandwich.
So I will tell you the permission is the reason we have communities, right? My permission is not to be bothered by what she is. Like real permission is to hang out with people who get me, right? Just like I was potty training my son years and years ago, and he just was having a very traumatic time. My brother sent me a book that said, "Oh, this worked wonders," right? And the first line in the book said that if you tell yourself that your kid just isn't ready to be potty trained, then you're not trying hard enough. And I was like, how quickly can I burn this book? Right? So I went into my community and I was like, ladies, please tell me that somebody here has a kid that is 5 years old that you cannot potty train and is literally having the most traumatic experience of his life. Of course, my daughter at 2 took off her diapers, put on her underwear, and is like, if you ever make me wear a diaper again, I am too old for this, right? But my son, and so a ton of women came and said, oh my gosh, that's completely normal. I dealt with that same thing. So the permission is to stop hanging out with the people who make you feel like you're crazy or that you're wrong. That's the permission. That woman has friends, and those friends all are stay-at-home moms, and they love each other and they get each other. And that is great. I want them to love each other and get each other and feel really good about the lives they chose. And I'm just not going to hang out with you. I'm going to hang out with the people who don't think I'm crazy for having my own business. So that's the permission, is the sense of belonging. Number 2 then is so they know that they belong. Number 2 in the permission sandwich is now we have to do clout, right? And clout is not about just saying, here's my podcast, here's the stuff I know. Clout is about getting other people to validate that you know what the heck you're talking about, which is getting featured on podcasts, right? Is one of the key ones. Speaking in places, doing the things that show you have authority, but not because you say it, because other people say it, right? So now I've created a sense of belonging. Now I've shown you that other people think I'm somebody to listen to. Third one is training, and we do 2 kinds of training. We do a fill a gap or give a hack. Fill a gap is where you change the way they think about something. Give a hack is where you actually tactically tell them how to do something. This shows them that I'm actually teaching you. I'm somebody to listen to that will give you ways to change the way you think and change, how you're doing things. Then we go in.
Wait, and real quick. What was that first? Silly hack? What did you say there? I missed.
It says fill a gap or give a hack. Yeah. So you're filling a gap in the way they think.
Yes.
Right? They think
I just didn't.
Yeah. And all webinars that you see that are good webinars are fill a gap webinars. They're going to make you look at the world differently and feel like what they want to sell you is possible and to be able to be successful for you. So those are all webinars or fill a gaps. So then the next one is recommend, right? So now I've given you permission to be like us, right? You're not crazy. I've shown you that other people see I'm smart. I've trained you to show that you now can validate that I'm smart. Now I'm going to recommend something outside of myself. So it could either be a product or something depending on your business, but it could also just be something you love, right? This I love this mug, or I love this tactic, or I love this book, right? That's outside of yourself, because now I've shown you that it's not all about me, that I also want to give you things that are outside of myself. And as those people start to buy those things or get those things or use those things, they attribute you to the use of that thing. So now you're starting to, emanate into their life. The next thing you do is actually ask them to do something. You ask them to buy something for you, get on a call with you, join a webinar, buy the program. And then after you ask, the last one is a feedback loop. Now that you've asked them for something, now you want feedback to ask them a very simplified question so that they not one that they click on, but one that they literally reply to you and tell you the answer in email. And then you start all over again. You do permission. So we call it a permission sandwiches because it starts and it ends with a permission. And literally what we do is we cycle through 2 of those every single month. We end with a flash sale when you do emails, and then we cycle through it. So what it allows our women to do is to not wonder how email marketing works. We've created a formula, and then we emanated that formula into social media as well for them to be able to take their opinions, go out and know where they're getting featured, what they're training, do all that stuff so that they can just plug it in and create a system that they are bringing somebody through that creates trust, it creates connection, it creates belonging, and it creates conversions. Hence the nurture to convert.
I love that. And you just came up with this through trial and error and just seeing it, in the wild out there and put a form to it?
My dad says when the muse hits, when the muse visits you, is what he used to say. Yeah. So I love funnel hacking. I love, reverse engineering. I love seeing what's working and playing with it. With the permission sandwich, I vividly remember the whiteboard, and I was living in a different apartment at the time. And I had this way of going, how can I structure this so that women are able to really do email marketing without having to pay some person to do something that feels completely unattainable to them? How can I make this a formula? And I thought, how do people form trust? How is trust formed? And then I walked through the psychology of how trust is formed, which is what is necessary for somebody to buy from you. And I broke it down into the kinds of things and content that we might create. And then, and here we are.
I love it. And so, Dana, for me, I'm going to use your permission sandwich with your permission. Are these 6 emails, 6 messages that go out, and you write them in this idea of that sense of belonging? So you want an email that goes out that says, I get you, I understand where you're coming from. And then you build clout to get so that might be a validation of someone you just worked with. Or here's a little story. Like, for instance, yesterday I was working with Walmart Canada, and I did a half day workshop with their retail sales leaders. And I got the best inadvertent testimonial maybe I've ever received in my life. And Dana, they had already been in sessions before I got there, and mine was 3.5 hours long. We took a break about an hour into my first one. When we got about now 2.5 hours in, we were working on their stories, and I said, why don't we take one more break and then come back, we'll work on your stories. Well, they jumped on the chat room and they said, no, let's keep going. A unanimous, let's throw out the bio break, let's keep rolling. So when we went to the breakout sessions, Sandy, one of their L&D leaders, said, this is the first time in my 15 years here at Walmart Canada that our attendees actually said no to a break. And we all started laughing like, yeah, that's pretty weird. And then it hit me like, that's great validation. So in my case, then I could send out an email to say, hey, here's something funny that happened yesterday.
Well,
it's so weird, but
I want to tell you though, the clout isn't about here's something that happened yesterday. And email subject lines, if we talked about email marketing, are one of the most important things, because getting somebody to click, it's like swiping right for business, right? So for you, what does your audience want? Right? So we still have to think that's the first question. So for that email, your subject line would be something like how you get your clients begging for more, right? That's the subject line. The clout isn't about your story, right? Necessarily. Like the clout is that you're validating your value, right? But the clout email still has to be about what's in it for them. So you telling that story still has to have some element of the value that they can take away. So make sure that your stories have a moral, right? There's always got to be a moral, and you want to tease the moral on top. So the idea is if you're out talking to potential clients, or you've got clients, like, it's key to keep everybody engaged. I was at blank over here and that's what I did. But at the end, you're going to go, so, now that this is one of or you can validate what you're saying is like, the ABT method was key to getting them, or the way I did this thing, or it just proves that storytelling is always the answer, whatever that is. So just remembering, a lot of times our ultimate goal has to be make me care, right? They don't care. It's got to be about them to care, and you can build clout in that way. And subject lines are the key. Like, if you can't get them to swipe right on your email, nobody's going to ever know how brilliant you are.
Great point. I wish we had more time. And Dana, I want you to come back because I want to dive deeper into this email marketing and the permission sandwich and some of these ideas you have around that, the subject line and how you tell the stories in there. This has been absolutely wonderful. Where can people learn more about you and find out more about your fantastic work?
Yeah. So the easiest place, if you go to boss-mom.com. So boss with just a dash, boss-mom.com. Well, I can say it. I swear. I've had the company for 7 years. And Yeah, so it'll give you the Boss Mom podcast. We just hit 2 million downloads, so that's snazzy.
Congratulations.
We've got our Facebook group. We've got over 70,000 amazing women in our Facebook group. It's amazing. It'll lead you to all the other places. We've got really good trainings. Actually, we have right on the homepage, it's called the Email on Autopilot Toolkit, and it shows you exactly how you should structure an opt-in to get people into your email. It gives you the exact permission sandwich that you need. It also gives you 5 templated emails to show you how they're done, and 50 subject lines that we know convert and how to use them. So it's a toolkit that'll really help you get people in and nurture, because you can't have a business that doesn't sell, right? Businesses have to sell. We are not running hobbies here, right? But we don't have to push people or coerce people into buying from us. Buying should be a thing of joy. Investing in the things we care about should be a joyful experience for both the person who's selling and the person that's buying. And we want email marketing to really start becoming synonymous with good nurturing and not just being pushy.
I'm a boss dad. Can I go to Boss Mom and follow all your tips?
We actually have the Boss
too?
Dad brand. We used to have a Boss Dad podcast, by the way.
Oh.
But yes, totally. We have guys in our community. If you want to come in and what we say resonates with you, absolutely.
Well, I'm so happy you didn't absquatulate on me.
Absquatulate.
Did I say thank you? I'm glad you didn't absquatulate on me and just take off. Dan, it's so wonderful having you here. I really appreciate it.
Oh, thanks for having me.
And thank you all for listening to this edition. Hey, if you like what you heard, head on over to boss-mom.com. I'm going to check it out because I struggle with my email marketing. It's me, and I'm cranking them out, and I send them out there, and some really work, and some fall flat on their faces. I, of course, use the ABT and tell stories in all of them, but I think I fall into that same trap of making it too much about me and not enough about the recipient. So, Dana, thank you so much for that reminder. Come on over to the Business of Story if I can help you craft and tell compelling stories that sell. And by all means, come on back next Monday when we'll have another amazing story artist right here for you like Dana. And until then, remember that the most potent story you'll ever tell is the story you tell yourself. So make sure that's a great one. Thanks so much for listening.